going to read you a story. It's by one of my favorite authors, George MacDonald. This story is called The Shadows, and while I read it, you can watch some shadows play on the wall. And in the background, if you listen carefully, you'll hear the sound that the objects being shown in light and shadow make when I tap on them. This video is part 1. We'll continue the story in the next video. But for now, feel free to watch the shadows and let them hypnotize you with their play, or just close your eyes and listen. The Shadows by George MacDonald. Old Ralph Wrinkleman made his living by comic sketches, and all but lost it again by tragic poems. So, he was just the man to be chosen king of the fairies, for in fairyland the sovereignty is elective. It is no doubt very strange that fairies should desire to have a mortal king, but the fact is that with all their knowledge and power, they cannot get rid of the feeling that some men are greater than they are, though they can neither fly nor play tricks. So at such times as there happens to be twice the usual number of sensible electors, such a man as Ralph Wrinkleman gets to be chosen. They did not mean to insist on his residence, for they needed his presence only on special occasions. But they must get hold of him somehow, first of all, in order to make him king. Once he was crowned, they could get him as often as they pleased. But before this ceremony there was a difficulty, for it is only between life and death that the fairies have power over grown-up mortals and can carry them off to their country. So they had to watch for an opportunity. Nor had they to wait long, for old Ralph was taken dreadfully ill, and while hovering between life and death, they carried him off and crowned him king of fairyland. But after he was crowned, it is no wonder, considering the state of his health, that he should not be able to sit quite upright on the throne of fairyland, or that, in consequence, all the gnomes and goblins and ugly cruel things that live in the holes and corners of the kingdom should take advantage of his condition and run quite wild, playing him, king as he was, all sorts of tricks, crowding about his throne, climbing up the steps, and actually scrambling and quarreling like mice about his ears and eyes, so that he could see and think of nothing else. But I am not going to tell anything more about this part of his adventures just at present. By strong and sustained efforts, he succeeded, after much trouble and suffering, in reducing his rebellious subjects to order. They all vanished to their respective holes and corners, and King Ralph, coming to himself, found himself in his bed, half propped up with pillows. But the room was full of dark creatures, which gamboled about in the firelight in such a strange, huge, though noiseless Had he thought at first that some of his rebellious goblins had not been subdued with the rest, but had followed him beyond the bounds of fairyland into his own private house in London? How else could these mad, grotesque hippopotamus calves make their ugly appearance in Ralph's bedroom? But he soon found out that although they were like the underground goblins, they were very different as well, and would require quite different treatment. He felt convinced that they were his subjects too, but that he must have overlooked them somehow at his late coronation, if indeed they had been present, for he could not recollect that he had seen anything just like them before. He resolved, therefore, to pay particular attention to their habits, ways, and characters, else he saw plainly that they would soon be too much for him, as indeed this intrusion into his chamber, where Mrs. Wrinkleman, who must be queen if he was king, sat taking some tea by the fireside, evidently foreshadowed. But she, perceiving that he was looking about him with a more composed expression than his face had worn for many days, started up and came quickly and quietly to his side, and her face was bright with gladness, whereupon the fire burned up more cheerily, and the figures became more composed and respectful in their behavior, retreating towards the wall like well-trained attendants. Then the King of Fairyland had some tea and dry toast, and leaning back on his pillows, nearly fell asleep, but not quite, for he still watched the intruders. Presently the queen left the room to give some of the young princes and princesses their tea, and the fire burned lower, and behold, the figures grew as black and as mad in their gambols as ever. Their favorite games seemed to be hide-and-seek, touch-and-go, grin and vanish, and many other such, and all in the king's bedchamber too, so that it was quite alarming. It was almost as bad as if the house had been haunted by certain creatures which shall be nameless in a fairy story, because with them fairyland will not willingly have much to do. But it is a mercy that they have their slippers on, said the king to himself, for his head ached, as he lay back with his eyes half shut and half open, too tired to pay longer attention to their games, but on the whole considerably more amused than offended with the liberties they took, for they seemed good-natured creatures, and more frolicsome than positively ill-mannered. He became suddenly aware that two of them had stepped forward from the walls, upon which, after the manner of great spiders, most of them preferred sprawling, and now stood in the middle of the floor at his Majesty's bed, becking and bowing and ducking in the most grotesquely obsequious manner, while every now and then they turned solemnly round upon one heel, evidently considering that motion the highest token of homage they could show. "What do you want?" said the king. "That it may please your Majesty to be better acquainted with us," answered they. "We are your Majesty's subjects." "I know you are. I shall be most happy," answered the king. "We are not what your Majesty takes us for, though. We are not so foolish as your Majesty thinks us." "It is impossible to take you for anything that I know of," rejoined the king, who wished to make them talk, and said whatever came uppermost. "For soldiers, sailors, or anything, you will not stand still long enough. I suppose you really belong to the fire brigade. At least you keep putting its light out." "Don't jest, please, your Majesty." And as they said the words, for they both spoke at once throughout the interview, they performed a grave somerset towards the king. "Not jest, retorted he, and with you, why, you do nothing but jest. What are you? The shadows, sire. And when we do jest, sire, we always jest in earnest. Perhaps your majesty does not see us distinctly. I see you perfectly well, returned the king. Permit me, however, rejoined one of the shadows, and as he spoke he approached the king, and lifting a dark forefinger, he drew it lightly but carefully across the ridge of his forehead from temple to temple. The king felt the soft gliding touch go like water into every hollow and over the top of every height of that mountain chain of thought. He had involuntarily closed his eyes during the operation, and when he unclosed them again, as soon as the finger was withdrawn, he found that they were opened in more senses than one. The room appeared to have extended itself on all sides, till he could not exactly see where the walls were, and all about it stood the shadows, motionless. They were tall and solemn, rather awful indeed in their appearance, notwithstanding many remarkable traits of grotesqueness, for they looked just like the pictures of Puritans drawn by cavaliers, with long arms and very long thin legs, from which hung large loose feet, while in their countenances length of chin and nose predominated. The solemnity of their mien, however, overcame all the oddity of their form, so that they were very eerie indeed to look at, dressed as they were all in funereal black. But a single glance was all the king was allowed to have, for the former operator waved his dusky palm across his vision, and once more the king saw only the fire-lighted walls and dark shapes flickering upon them. The two who had spoken for the rest seemed likewise to have vanished, but at last the king discovered them, standing one on each side of the fireplace. They kept close to the chimney wall and talked to each other across the length of the chimney piece, thus avoiding the direct rays of the fire, which, though light is necessary to their appearing to human eyes, do not agree with them at all, much less give birth to them, as the king was soon to learn. After a few minutes they again approached the bed, and spoke thus. It is now getting dark, please your majesty. We mean out of doors in the snow. Your majesty may see from where he is lying the cold light of its great winding sheet, a famous carpet for the shadows to dance upon, your majesty. All our brothers and sisters will be at church now, before going to their night's work. Do they always go to church before they go to work? They always go to church first. Where is the church?